God always promised. Oh, the kids can go back with Leslie and Dave. Thanks, Dave, for reminding me of your name there. Yeah. It's terrible to get old, you know.
Could you repeat the verse?
Yes, it's 1 Samuel 17, and it'll be 1 through 54. And we'll read that in just a minute or two. And if any of the kids aren't comfortable going back to New Day Kids, we do have activity packets. So if, Lisa, would you mind if any of the kids want an activity pack, getting it to them?
Sorry.
All right, moms or dads, Lisa can get the kids activity pack. God has always promised Israel. He always told Israel, look, if you trust me and you follow my commands, you'll always be victorious in battle. Regardless of who the enemies are, or how big they are, or, how strong they are, you will have victory. Well, about 400 years after Jericho, you remember we looked at the fall of Jericho last week, about 400 years after the fall of Jericho, Israel was at war again with the Philistines. And the Philistines were a pagan people who had really advanced military strength for that time in history. And so let me give you a little setting of how this whole thing started. They were at war with the Philistines, and the Philistines were lined up on one hill. The Israelites were lined up on another hill, and then there was a valley in between the two of them. So let's take a look and see what happens as this battle played out for Israel and the Philistines. So we're going to begin with verse 1. And I'm going to go 1 through 24, then I'm going to have Preston come up for 25 to 44, then I'm going to finish it off. So let me start out, we'll go 1 through 24 to start with. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sokah in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Sokah and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Yes, that's where Jesus was born later on. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now imagine that for a minute. 40 days he came out defying the armies of Israel. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. There was Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now I'm going to ask if Preston will come up and read 25 through 44.
25
Through
through
44.
44. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, but he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." How far?
Right there.
My pleasure. No problem.
I might have to get Preston to read passages all the time. He does better than I do. So let's pick up there with 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistine's weapon in his own tent. All right, long passage there, but man, there's a lot of awesome stuff that we can learn from this passage. Guys, in case you haven't noticed, life can be full of valleys. And not only is it often full of valleys, but sometimes those valleys have giants in them, that we have to face. And the thing is, we can't avoid them all. I mean, valleys in life and giants coming against us, so to speak, is part of life. But what we can do, even though we can't avoid them all the time, what we can do is we can decide how to handle them. And so in every valley situation that we have in life, we have a decision to make. We can either trust God and be victorious, or we can cower in fear and be victims. The choice is up to us. When we face these obstacles in life, we can either trust God and know, just like Israel, if we trust God, we're going to be victorious, or we can succumb to our fears and the size of the problem, and then what we do is we end up becoming victims. And that's exactly what Israel was faced with. Were they going to trust God and know that they could defeat the Philistines, including Goliath, or were they going to succumb to their fears and end up being victims? Well, as they so often did, they chose not to trust God, and so they were just a bunch of cowards standing in battle line, not willing to go out and fight. But who was different? David was different. David was different than all. Think about it. Of all the Israelite armies, all of these seasoned fighting men, including the king himself, not one of them was willing to go out and stand up to Goliath, except for David. David had what we talked about last week. David had a victor's attitude. David was a guy that had, and I chose the title of the sermon just because I wanted to grab people's attention, but I think it fits him. David had swagger. And swagger is this. Swagger is a person who has a lot of confidence in themselves. No doubt in what they are able to do. And David had a lot of swagger. Think about this for a minute, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Of all of the Israelite fighting men, only this one guy, David, who was a shepherd, and scholars believe he was probably somewhere between 16 and 19 years old. And the reason they feel that way is because the fighting age was 20 and up. And so David's brothers were out fighting and he wasn't. He was still back tending his father's flock. So that tells us that David was below the age of 20. So at the very most he was 19, but he might have even been younger than that. So here you've got this guy who's maybe 16 to 19 years old, still a teenager. And he's the only one that's got enough confidence, enough swagger, enough trust in God to go out against a giant and stand his ground against this guy who was just like this formidable beast of a man. And not only was he willing to face him, but something I've always found is awesome about David is he ran to the battle. All of Israel's armies were standing back there afraid of this guy. David ran to the battle. And not only that, but he faces this guy down and he says, look, man, I'm going to cut off your head, dude. And then I'm going to feed all of your armies to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Now that's a guy that's got some swagger. That's a guy that's got some confidence in who he is. Why do you think David had such of a victor's attitude? What do you think made him so confident against this guy? Yeah.
So it's interesting to me. It's not like he just randomly fought Goliath, right? It's not like he was just some random kid who was like, let's go do this, and walked right into the king and was like, hey, I'm going to do this.
Right.
The Lord prepared him with the lions and the bears.
Yeah.
And that's a feat to itself. I mean, if a lion or a bear takes my sheep, I ain't chasing.
Right.
And
You can have them.
He also set it up with Saul. He was playing the harp for Saul beforehand. And so he wasn't just like, Saul already knew him somewhat, enough for him just to walk in on him and say, let's do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Lord prepared him for this position before it even happened. The Lord was putting things in his spot to build his confidence. He had the confidence to face Goliath because he fought the lions and the bears. He had confidence to face the king, which probably just as scary as the lion and lambs, because
Good
he
point.
had been in Saul's presence before playing the harp.
Yeah, I never thought of that. If he hadn't ever been in Saul's presence before, it's like, who are you coming into my tent, dude? That's like a fatal offense there,
Right.
Yeah, good point. Any other ideas why, Chris?
Well, before people think that the Israelites are the aggressors, the Philistines were literally invading their land at that time.
Yeah, you're right. They were probably marauders in Jerusalem. Yes, plundering the people's properties and killing people. Yeah, they weren't like they were just this innocent bunch of people the Israelites came against. Yeah, Danny?
David had his faith in the Lord.
Yeah, had his faith in the Lord. Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at some of these. You guys are right on track. One was this. One of the reasons David had such swagger is he focused on the size of God, not on the size of the giant. And the armies of Israel, though, they were doing the total opposite. They were looking at the size of the problem rather than the size of their God. And I wonder if we sometimes do the same thing. When we're in our valleys and we're facing our giants, we get all focused on the problem rather than focused on the power, the majesty, and the size of God. Connor?
When you compare God to the size of anything to the size of a man.
Yeah, it doesn't compare, huh? Yeah, and granted, Goliath was a formidable foe. I mean, he was over 9 feet tall. His armor, just the part he wore on the top, not even the bronze greaves on his legs, but just the armor, the coat of armor that he wore, was 125 pounds. All right, that's like carrying another person on your back to go into battle. Then the point of his spear, just the point of his spear was 15 pounds. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute picking up a spear that had 15 pounds on the end of it and trying to use it in any way efficiently. I mean, it's just, how is that possible? But this guy was so huge that was just like normal stuff for him. And then something I didn't really ever think about till I was reading this again, even though I've studied this passage many times, is he had a shield bearer. So, I mean, it was kind of like 2 against 1. He's kind of like, I can just imagine, here's Goliath. This guy's like over 9 feet tall, and he's this big strapping guy. And he's like, hey, you. And he grabs one of the smallest, littlest guys from the Philistine army and says, you get behind the shield there and make sure I don't get hit by anything. So there's little sniveling guys like this walking in front of Goliath. It's like, I'm going to die. But Goliath's like, as long as I don't die, that's all that matters. So it's kind of like 2 against 1 even. So then here's David. He comes out. He tried armor. Didn't work for him. So he comes out just in his shepherd garb. Just his robe and what he normally had with him, his staff and then a sling and some stones. So, I mean, he was focused on the size of God, not on the size of the problem. What giant in your life seems too big to overcome right now? Anybody want to share anything? Might help somebody else. I mean, what is this situation you might be facing? You're just like, man, this thing's like up here and I'm down here, and it's like there's no way I'm going to be able to ever get through this thing. Connor?
I actually had to say, one is weight loss, down to the point where I feel like I can actually become through it, which is at least about 140 pounds. So that's a feat in itself, and the other one is trying to get a diagnosis for ADHD. That's devastating.
Okay, tell me a diagnosis for.
ADHD and autism.
Okay, yes, that can be tough. Yeah. But you can do it. Other people have done it, you can do it. And people have even done it that don't have God with them, and you have God with you.
Amen.
So you can beat this thing. What are some other giants maybe you're facing? Yeah, Mary?
Financial?
Yeah, absolutely, that's a big giant.
Another weight loss.
Okay, another weight loss. Okay. Yeah, that's a tough one. It is. Linda?
Patience.
Patience. Okay. Want to develop patience, man, it just keeps not coming, right? Yeah. Well, I think we probably all got that giant we have to face. Huh? Yeah. Chris?
Myself with complacency.
Okay. All right. You just gave me a good lead in to one of my examples, but I'll wait. And I didn't pay Chris to say that. But any other giants that you're facing? Nancy?
Medication.
Medications. Deal. Oh, yep. Absolutely.
Health.
Jody?
Family issues.
Family issues. Colleen said health. Let me tell you one that, yeah, Wendy? Okay. All right. Keeping you kind of feeling tired and drowsy all the time? Yeah.
Work.
Work. Oh, yeah. That's a big one. Yeah. Well, I don't really see how Chris is complacent, but at least from what I see in him, now maybe his dad would differ with me, I don't know, but I'm just joking. But I'll tell you one that I face, and I think probably most pastors these days face this, and it's facing us as New Day Fellowship, and this giant's attempting to hinder us from fulfilling God's mission in the world. And that is that we guys are right now facing a complacent Christian culture. All right? And let me read to you what the definition of complacency is and see if you agree with me. It's a state of self-satisfaction with a lack of awareness of potential dangers, leading to a failure to strive for improvement. I think so many Christians are stuck in complacency these days. They're kind of like, okay, I'm saved, that's really all that matters. And they're missing the dangers of not continually growing deeper and stronger in their relationship with the Lord. And the devil is just loving it. He's loving it when Christians are complacent, satisfied with where they're at, not willing to go deeper in their relationship with the Lord, not to serve more heartedly, not to be more on fire for the Lord, not to have a stronger testimony in the world. He just loves that. And then you couple that, and I'll get to you in a second, Chris, and you couple that with then we are also living in an anti-God world culture. And when you put those two together, it seems like to be a church, particularly a newer church like us, that is impacting the world, it sometimes seems like, man, everything's against us. And in a way it is, but our God's bigger than complacency. Our God is bigger than an anti-God world. And that's who we need to keep our eyes on. Chris?
I think you could say that, the whole Israelite army with their armor on and they're shaking in their boots? That's the church age today.
I think you're right.
We're
Absolutely.
equipped with the armor of God and the sword, but here we are fearing this and that, and we should just be fighting against them.
Yeah, and always willing to stand on the sidelines and not get involved in the battle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see that in you, brother. I really don't. So I'm going to disagree with your view of yourself as being complacent.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we need to focus on the size of God, not the size of the problem. Second thing that gave David the kind of swagger that he had is he didn't listen to naysayers. You notice when he's like, man, I want to go out and take this guy down. He's defying God. And what did he do? First thing he ran into was his brother, who was accusing him of being there for the wrong reasons. And it's probably because his brother was somewhat jealous because David had been anointed by Samuel to be the next king. And so his brother was kind of probably jealous of him. And maybe because David was, it's described here as being handsome and a ruddy guy, you know, kind of like man's man kind of thing. So maybe his brother was a little bit jealous of that. But his brother came against him, trying to deter him from going out and fighting against Goliath. And then if you take a look at verse 33, look at what Saul said to him, the king. He said, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy. And he has been a fighting man from his youth. So it's kind of like if you're David, you might be sitting there thinking, man, all right, nobody has any confidence in me. Nobody wants me to do anything. Okay, I'll just pack up and go back to my sheep. But he wasn't like that. He didn't listen to the naysayers. Lisa?
How often before God does something great through us, do we get attacked by the devil in any way to stop us from getting to that step?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a perfect example right here in David where he's attacked, and it's always negative.
Yeah.
It's never positive, and absolutely nowhere is God found in it.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times that's right before a breakthrough that will point and give God the glory and the honor because he's able to do something miraculous we can't do through our own works.
Right.
And that was where David was. He had seen things in his life where God had carried him through with the lion, with the bear. And yeah, this was one more big step, but we see the exact same story with Peter and getting out of the boat and walking, and as long as his eyes were on Jesus, he was focused, he was walking on water. As long as David stayed focused on God, and even when he was being yelled at with Goliath of what was going to happen to him, he still turned everything around and didn't say, I'm going to do it. He said, God's going to do it, and he consulted God, he consulted God's army and God's people, and everything was getting glory back to God. And how often in our lives do we actually stop and do that?
Right.
And he did that before it was even a successful win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Life was still standing there alive, and he's given God the glory and the praise that he's going to be the victor in this.
Yeah.
That it's not going to be me. It's not going to be putting the praise back on the human self.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it. As you were saying that, something that popped into my mind of other people facing the naysayers. Think about how many naysayers Jesus faced. His own family thought he was crazy. Constantly, the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, were coming against him. I mean, so think of that. I mean, he constantly had people saying, you're crazy, you can't do this, who are you? People in his own town were saying, well, isn't this Joseph's son? Who's this guy think he is coming in here doing miracles? How many times have you guys had naysayers in your life whenever you're faced with a challenge and you're trying to stand in faith, you're trying to have some swagger, you're getting that victor's attitude, you're starting to do good, and then somebody comes up and says, you might as well just give up. The odds are against you. The problem's too big. It's too late now. You don't have what it takes. Ruben?
It makes me think of a part of Esther, where Esther's, I believe it was his her uncle was speaking to her. He was fasting outside of the city gates and whatever in the Israelite sackcloth. And Esther and him are talking back and forth through a messenger. And he basically tells her that, you have to do this. If you don't do this, the Lord's will is still going to be done. It says, deliverance is going to rise up for the Jews. And if it's not from you, your house will be destroyed.
Mm. Wow.
The Lord's will is going to be done. And whenever He's asking us to do something, we can have confidence in this Lord's will. This is going to be done. But it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with me, but everything to do with what the Lord wants and who we're supposed to be.
Yeah, and isn't it sad in those kind of situations that if we choose not to trust God and do what He has appointed for us to do, that we get to miss out on the victory. We get to miss out on how God changes people's lives and saves them and encourages them because we decided not to step out in faith. And it would have been the same with Esther. You know, and look, she's gone down in history as this incredible person who trusted God, particularly in a day and time where women had basically no rights. You know, and God used her in this mighty way to deliver His people. And imagine, God would have done it anyhow, but she wouldn't have got to be part of the victory. How about us as Christians when you're talking about complacency? So many people are willing to stand back on the sidelines, let somebody else do it. And then when God does a great thing, we don't get to celebrate that we were part of it. Did I see somebody else's hand up, Mary?
Yeah, talk about the naysayers when you were talking about, I was listening to when you were commenting, and I've always been told that even though I read the Bible, I always, when I made a comment to something, they would tell me I needed to study more.
Is that right? My goodness. You know, here's what I've got to say to the naysayers. All right? Ignore them. All right? Don't listen to them. All you got to do is listen to what the Lord's saying, what His Word's teaching, what God's called you to do. All right? What He's going to do in your life as you slay your giants. Don't listen to them.
Maybe that brought about the anxiety,
Sure.
trying to strive.
Yeah, somebody you're trying to step out in faith, share your scriptures, and they're pushing you down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ignore them. Don't let that past deter you from what God's got for you now. Jody?
A different way of thinking about a naysayer. They're speaking out of their own failures, their own insecurities. It's easier for a naysayer to put you down than to realize, oh, maybe they're right.
Mm.
I mean, it's easy. Sometimes it's easy to listen to a naysayer because it will be easier to do what they tell you to do.
Yeah. Taking the easy road
And
out.
taking the easy way out. Other than standing strong and going,
Oh, yeah.
well,
Yeah. I mean, taking a stand of faith when we're facing a giant is difficult enough as it is. But then when you got people that are trying to discourage you at the same time, yeah, then we can sometimes like, okay, it's just be easier if I just backed off, you know, if I just gave up. You know, but God doesn't want you to. If you give up, you don't slay the giant. So ignore them. And if you still hear some of those whispers from the past in your ear that you don't measure up or you can't do this or whatever it might be, ignore those. That's just the devil trying to remind you of things to discourage you. All you need to do is stand on what God's Word says about you, not what anybody else says about you. That's the only truth, is what God says.
You have to know what His Word says, though, to know what to stand on.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to know who you are in Christ in order to stand against the naysayers. That's a really good point. And that comes back to that complacency again, is people are satisfied, okay, I got my ticket to heaven, and they don't get in and study the Word and get a deep knowledge of who God is, who they are in Christ, and so then they are open to those dangers that the definition of complacency talked about, and they become the devil's whipping boy, and they're overcome by their giants because they were complacent and didn't learn who they are in Christ. You got to know who you are to defeat the giant. Rustin?
I think this is like a beautiful story of like faith in action. You know what I mean? Like David had faith in God, and his faith resulted in action. You know, faith without works is dead. He had the works that accompanied his faith. You know what I mean? That allowed for the deliverance of Israel in this circumstance, right?
Yeah.
But like, he could have, right, been like, this isn't my problem, I don't need to do this, gone home. I feel content in my relationship with Jesus, or well, Yahweh, I don't have to do anything, you know what I mean? And then like this beautiful thing that God wanted to do through him wouldn't have been done. You know?
Yeah. He was safe and sound back with the sheep, except for the lions and the bears, right? But otherwise, he didn't need to put his neck out there for
Sure.
facing giants.
So the courage is amazing, but I also think it's like, in the New Testament it says like God has created works, I think it's Ephesians, pre-created works for us to do. You know, there are works predestined for us to do, right? Like
Yeah.
made before the foundations of the earth. This was probably one of those things that beckoned from David's spirit, like God's leading me to do this thing, you know what I mean? And if I don't do this thing, I won't feel like complete or like I serve the Lord with all my heart, and it's probably something like he was drawn to do.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. And I hope every Christian that hears this, and maybe if you guys at home didn't hear, is he said, Preston said that if you don't follow God's leading, then, how'd you put it, you're not complete. You don't feel complete.
It's fulfilling.
Yeah, you're not fulfilled until you do what God's called you to do. And God has called every one of us as believers to slay giants and to glorify Him. And until you do that, you're always going to live with a sense of being incomplete or unfulfilled. Connor?
I'm going to modify a phrase. It's probably one of my favorite phrases throughout the 140,000 Advent. One of the favorite phrases I'm going to modify is it's better to live and die for the Lord than it is to live for yourself.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's what believers have lived by throughout the ages, isn't it? And died for. Yeah. Well, another reason that David had swagger, and I'm going to spend just a second on this because Reuben pointed it out so well to start with, is David remembered his past victories. I mean, he saw where God delivered him before from the lion and the bear. And so he knew, look, if God delivered me before, why wouldn't He deliver me again? And so what you need to do when you face your giants in the valley times is you need to look back and remind yourself of how God delivered you and gave you victory before, and know that He is faithful and He will do it again. So let me ask you real quickly, anybody, share with us a victory, a time where God gave you victory over something that you thought was going to be insurmountable, but God got in there and you won the battle.
First thing that comes to mind is like custody of my daughter. I was really struggling with that for a while, and it was really a tense situation with my family. Seemed insurmountable for sure, and it actually seemed like they had a lot of power over me, and like it was going to be a real uphill battle, like court battle, custody battle, all that. A lot of prayer, and everybody's hearts just changed about it.
That's
They
cool.
were incredibly compliant and just gave up custody to me.
Yeah.
So,
Veronica, you hear that?
yeah.
Right there, girl. God did it for him. He's going to do it for you. All right. Any others? Stories of victory? Connor?
This was a little bit but when I initially lost my brother from the bear that he did, it didn't seem like any of us were going to be able to ever move forward from it. And after I think it's been 10 years now officially, it's still a scar, but it's not debilitating like it was.
Right?
That's
Yes.
definitely one thing God carried us all through.
And that was a giant. Yeah. And so know that the next time you face a difficulty like that, the same way He carried you through then, He'll do it again. You guys are one of my victory stories. There was a group of people who tried to keep me from the mission of God that He put on my life from ages past, just like David. But we defeated the giant, and here we are. Yeah. And so I need to use that as a stepping stone of faith. That when we face some barriers as a group of believers. I need to say, look, this is what God did before, Jim. He's going to do it again. He was faithful before. He's going to be faithful again. And keep standing on that. All right, number 4, and we'll wrap up with this one. David had swagger because he knew a victory would glorify God. And Lisa touched on that. Take a look at verse 46 again. Listen to what David proclaimed. And he proclaimed this to the giant. He's like getting in his face, and he says this in verse 46. He says, "This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." God gets glory in victories, not in defeats. And victories inspire other people. We sometimes tend to think that, well, God wants to make everything hard on me. God doesn't want me to overcome this. God wants me to suffer. Asking God to do this for me is too much to ask. God gets glory when you slay the giants, not when you're slayed by the giant. And nobody's inspired by defeats. They're only inspired by victories. And you notice what happened with Israel is after David slayed Goliath, the armies of the Philistines began to run, and then all of a sudden the Israelite army was like, "Oh yeah, we can win," and they went after the Philistine army and slayed them. It's like, well, yeah, now you guys are all brave, now that David did the hard work. But victories inspire other people. God gets the glory when we slay our giants. Chris, do you have your hand up?
Yeah. So Jesus conquered death, he conquered the grave, he conquered sin. So we operate from a position of victory already. We just have to stand firm and let him fight the battle for us. So many times in the Old Testament, you see God going before the armies. And he tells anyone that's not courageous, anybody that needs to care for their wife at home, or anybody that is building a house at home, if you're worried about that, send them back. So.
Yeah, you're right. We're fighting from a position of victory that's already been won. Yeah, that's good. So look, if God is glorified in victories, then why wouldn't he help you slay your giants? God deserves the glory. So if he's glorified in victories, why wouldn't he help you slay your giant? It'd be kind of silly if he wouldn't. Right? So use that as a stepping stone of faith. I'm going to ask the praise team to come up, and we're going to sing a victory song. And then I want you guys, when you leave here today, I want you to leave here with a victor swagger. All right? Hold your head up. Don't cower before any giant in your life. And know, as Chris said, we're fighting from a victory that's already been won. Danny, did you have something?
Yeah, just to add on to that, and in verse 47, it does say that the battle is the Lord's.
Yeah, it wasn't David's, was it? If it would have been David's, he'd have been in trouble.